I believe all humans have the potential of being creative. This time of difficulty for all humanity is the best time, in my view, to improve ourselves, to be better at what we do. Now, the number one reason why architects, designers, students of architecture fail to be creative is the thinking methodology. Now let's take a look at the whiteboard and see how we can explain that. Here are two sketches that describes the extremes of each of these method of thinking or thinking methodology. This is the linear method of thinking, and this is the spiral method of thinking, or the interactive. So as you can see here in this sketch, I'm trying to visualize the two extremes of the thinking methodology. The first one being the linear, the mechanical, if you want to say the logical, or the Newtonian. The Newtonian being you move from one atom to the other atom, to the third atom, and so on, until you get the result. The other one, which is spiral, the integrative, the interactive, the dialectical, and I'll explain that in a minute, is based on a different mind frame or thinking methodology than this one. This one is phases. You finish one phase, you move on to the other phase, and so on and so forth. You have a problem, and it's a functional problem, obviously, that fulfills a functional need by society, by a member of the society or a body of the society. So you start with a data collection. You go to a site, you analyze a program, you do research, and you try to collect as much information as possible as a designer, and then you move on to the conceptual design, which is part of the schematic design. Once you finish that and you have a concept of some sort, sometimes there's no concept, you just lay out the different elements of the functions of the program, and then you move on to the design development phase. At this design development phase, normally 99% of the cases of the current architectural practices, they get the systems integration phase activated. By the word systems integration, I mean all the systems that the building need in order to function properly: the mechanical, the electrical, the geotechnical, even though geotechnical sometimes hover around this area, but it is activated here. Communication and all other, the structural are all kick-start here at this point. Then, whatever the architect has of a concept has to be worked with, regardless of whether these systems would agree or would think it's feasible for that concept, for this particular problem. So they have to fit in this architectural solution regardless, as I said, because it's a linear process. It's a linear thinking or methodology. And then this somehow works out as a solution with compromises, and then you introduce value engineering here a lot. The value engineering is, because of this, it's born out of this conception or this line of thinking in order to minimize the impact on the cost. And then you move on to the construction documents, which is basically the detailing of the project all the way to the closeout and the final result. Now, where is the other aspects other than the function, such as the climate, such as the culture? They're all supposedly tackled here, but in fact tackled here by the architect, who most of the time has no idea what the mechanical calculations are, or the heating or the cooling loads, or the exposure, or the sun rays or thermal loading. Then you end up here and then you start to design overestimated mechanical system, or you load your system, overload your building with heating or cooling in order to compensate for the poor environmental design decisions that happened here while these people have been secluded from the decision making at this point. This is the linear type of thinking that I'm saying it's responsible, or the number one reason why architects and designers and students of architecture fail to be creative. The other one is the road that leads architects and designers to be more creative, just because at this stage, when you develop your data collection phase, or you finish your data collection phase, actually the system integration starts here. The systems integration starts at the very early stage. And then you start to do iterations, considering all the aspects, where here you moved from one stage to the other until you faced a deadlock. A mechanical engineer would dictate that you have to have this kind of solution for your building, then your heights are different, your surface space are different, and everything else is different. I'm not saying that, I'm the first one to discover this, but in practice, the engineers are only introduced at this level. This is the reality. This is what happens all over the world. And in my view, in a way, this impacts the environment as well, and why we are seeing buildings consume so much energy and badly designed, and are considered part of the problem that affected the environment, unfortunately. This methodology is the integrative methodology. It's not only mechanical. I mean, you don't have to remember this in order to be integrative. It is actually a multifaceted process. But the main thing is that all the systems are here, should be integrated at this point, and then you start doing iterations, try and error. But you have to include everything. You have to include all the systems. You have to include all the things that impact, including culture. So this I did probably perfectly adaptive to environmental design or ecological design. However, this can be applicable also to aesthetic design. So when you're here, when I say system, I also mean systems that are surrounding your building. What type of urban setup, context, culture, history, typology of buildings, materials of buildings, all these systems has to be taken at this point. And then you move on to other milestones. These red dots here are milestones. So start from simulation. Simulation, here we have another system that we need to employ or deploys. We don't have this here. So this system would be a software that we simulate the building, see whether or not it consumes a lot of energy by orientation, by creating better building envelopes, and so on and so forth. The phase of deduction, we deduce what happened, what the results of the simulation are versus our design, and then we improve to do another building design model. So there's always improvement checking. These are what we call the iterations, and we pass through data processing, and then we do an induction and further improvements until we reach the final result. Now this is a graph that really is symbolic of the complicated form versus the simplistic form that appears here. So you see all these glass buildings that consumes a lot of energy, that really negated or turn its back to the environmental factors. That's why I drew the sun here. I didn't draw anything here. That means it's a glass building, whether it's in Dubai or in Chicago or in other parts of the world, or in Tokyo. It's a glass building. And I know that technology has provided us with means to minimize the impact of the hot weather or the cold weather. But this tells me that the environmental or the system integration has not been considered, or it's being neglected in order to the aesthetics to prevail. That I want my building as glass no matter what. So I hope that this comparison, again, I'm not trying to imply that you have to memorize these shapes, but it's just an illustration of what I meant by an integrative process, a dialectical approach versus a linear or mechanical approach. So to all architects, all designers, all students of architectures, or professors of architecture, I say that having lack of creativity and the programs, the way they are shaped in the schools of architecture is not your fault, really. It's the fault of the dominant culture. That canonization of architecture is responsible, and it's been widespread. It started from the first industrial revolution, where things had to look like factories, things have to be laid out as functions that are very economic and very functional and very efficient functionally. So the number one reason for lack of creative resources, as I explained just a minute ago, is the static, non-ecological thinking, or versus the dialectic, which is the kind of law of nature. This is how nature or ecology works. It's an evolving system that is based on balance. It is the laws of interactive balance. Ecological systems found in nature work this way. So the question now is, what should you do to pull all of this information or into application, or turn this information into application? Here are my comments, and you can definitely explore about these issues. These are by no means cast in stone issues. They are directives, or they are sort of guidelines. Number one, think of all the elements affecting design as systems, not things, not objects. Plus, think interactively between these systems. Number two, consider cultural context, always. When you build, you don't build in the desert, sometimes you do. Then the desert becomes your cultural context. Consider the culture, the history, the aesthetics of the place, the history of the place, the people of the place. And that is consideration number two. Number three, consider the environment again as systems, not objects. Don't think about the sun separately from the wind and separately from the potential of topography or orientation, all that. Think of all of this, or ecology, or habitats, and so on and so forth. So again, think of environment as systems. Number four, think of aesthetics with the concept as its core. As I said before, the core of aesthetics is the concept. The core of concept is not aesthetics, so it's not vice versa. Number five, think of architectural formal composition as a manifestation of something else, which I explained is the architectural concept. I really hope that this short video has motivated you to deeply understand the major reason why architectural students or architects or designers face this lack of creativity. We need to take interest in dynamic thought. Without this dynamic, dialectical, ecological thinking, we're just blocking our fountain of creativity, and you have to trust me on that. Thank you for being interested in what I have to say. I wish you all success, and I will continue to provide you with what I think can and will make you more creative.